Welcome everyone to hear this presentation on nature management with year-round grazing with horses in the northern region. My name is Aino Tuominen and I'm the chair of the board for Rewilding Finland Association, which in Finnish Suomen luonnon villiinitysyhdistys. If you want to hear more about our association, please go to the website rewildingfinland.com or villiinnytys.fi. But now to the subject. So welcome everyone to hear about this experiment in research done in Sweden, where they have studied horse grazing around the year in the northern conditions. And this is to promote meadow biodiversity and to provide cost-effective solutions for nature management. Our keynote speaker today is Carl-Gustaf Thulin, and so welcome, Carl-Gustaf. It's good to have you here.
Thank you very much, Aino.
So please, you can start the presentation.
Okay, there you go. Okay, thank you very much, Aino, and tervetuloa, everybody. You're out, I don't see you, but you are out there somewhere. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk to you about some of the research we have done, but I will also extend it a little bit more from only horses. I will also talk a bit about bison, European bison that is, and I will also talk a little bit about fauna restoration in general, and also something about wildlife history, wildlife history. And it will be quite a Swedish perspective. I'm not so aware of the conditions in Finland in terms of population history and so forth. So it will be a Swedish perspective, but I think that the situation or conditions is quite similar. So I was bold enough putting fauna restoration in the north as the title. Whatever that includes, but I was thinking of Sweden and Finland. So I'm a researcher at the university, Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and actually I have a degree in genetics. So this is my history of a PhD research. Most of the research that I've done has been in genetics, but during the last 10-15 years, maybe I have drifted more and more into what we refer to as fauna restoration, or you can also say rewilding. It's not exactly the same thing, but it's similar. And also I'm quite interested in sterilization, which of course applies to horses. So with that said, I go on, and this is recorded, as Aino told you, and so I will give this presentation and then continuously, and then we'll have a discussion or questions after, if any. So hold your horses, eller rättare sagt, hold on to your horses, perhaps. Now we start. So I will drop back some 20,000 years in time when Fennoscandia, which is us and also Norway, was completely covered with ice. The ice sheet was going all the way down to northern Germany. So this whole area was a glacier. Of course, this picture is not from that time, but it's to give you some idea of what it was like along the edge of the ice. Pretty much a huge glacier covering all of our countries. And of course, during this time, there was no wildlife. There was nothing really. And so since then, the height of the last glaciation some 20,000 years ago, all of these terrestrial mammals that we are aware of and some that we are not aware of colonized Sweden. And this is actually a study from Lund University in Sweden, in southern Sweden. And it's in Swedish. I excuse that. I have next one in English, but this was more complete. It gives you an idea of when different organisms, and of course you have to know Swedish to recognize them, but you can see on the lines that many of them came wandering in some 8 to 10,000 years ago. give or take. And some are more recent, and some was here since a long time. I want you to, so this basically covers most of the terrestrial mammals that we have naturally occurring in Sweden, of which I know most of them also occur in Finland. I would like you to pay some extra attention to the ones in the green square, which in English will be wild reindeer on top. And I know that you have working a lot with the reintroduction of wild reindeer in Finland. And then you have this giant deer that is an extinct species, but was a huge animal, bigger than the current moose. And it was something in terms of grazing behavior, something in between red deer and fallow deer, as far as we know. Wisent is European bison in Swedish. So we had in Sweden European bison at a short interval. We also had aurochses, uroxe, and we actually have findings of mammoth in Sweden. Quite some time ago, very recent after the ice sheet withdrew, but still we have had. And then we actually have the wild horse, or vildhäst as it is called in Sweden. So also quite some time ago, and then you see a question mark, so it's a bit uncertainty here. I think since this study was done, additional studies have shown that it has been here a little bit longer time period. And on the bottom, what is referred to as kärrsköldpadda is actually European pond turtle, so it's not a mammal, but I don't know why they included it, but it's interesting anyway. We've had it in Sweden until 4,000 years ago. So this is more of an academic picture, but with fewer species. And now you can read the English name, but you have here the giant deer, the bison, and the aurochs, and also the wild horse. And the thick lines are in Sweden, and the thin line is in Denmark. So you can see that all of these species has been here. And in Denmark, you can actually see that the aurochs, the ancestor of our domestic cattle, was present until quite recently, at the birth of Christ, or even more recent. And you may know that the giant deer is extinct. The European bison went actually extinct in the wild in the early 20th century, but was restored. The aurochs, the last wild aurochs, was, according to history, shot in Poland in 1627. And the last wild horse, it's a bit uncertainty on exactly when the last wild horse, the European wild horse, the tarpan, was extinct, but sometime around last turn of the century, some end of the 19th century, early 20th century. So after all these animals recolonized Sweden, we had the populations were, I supposedly, going up and down. We don't really know so long time back. Some disappeared, but some prevailed. But in the end of the 18th century, something quite dramatic happened. Our king in Sweden, and actually Finland also at this time, was Gustav III. And he decided in 1789, he decided that hunting was allowed for everybody. Before, hunting for bigger game, large carnivores, large ungulates, was obliged only to the king and the nobility. But from this year, it was hunted. It was allowed for any landowner, hunter, farmer, and all people could hunt. And as a consequence, primarily the edible species went extinct rapidly. So in a very few years, most of the moose and most of the deer was gone. And of course, at this time, a moose was an important food resource. So if you could kill a moose, it would mean a lot for your family. Now, first, the prey disappeared, and the predators that remained, they started to harass people more and more because they needed something to eat. So they went for our domestic species. And then we started a intensive hunt on large carnivores. And in Sweden, it actually ended as recent as 1965. In 1965 in Sweden, it was still bounty for wolf hunting. But from the 1st of January 1966, it was a protected species. So this is not so long ago. It was actually 3 years before I was born. So we had bounty hunting for wolves so recent, which is kind of interesting. And the reason was that wolf was considered a pest. But I think there's a lot to learn here, that first the prey disappear and then the predators became an obstacle and then they disappear, mostly because of us, but also if they don't have any feed, it will be problematic. So we have to have a system we both have prey and predators. And this happened here in Northern Europe, but this is a general scenario all over the world, that large terrestrial vertebrates disappear. And this is just to give you an idea. There are many different figures about this, but some 10,000 years ago, you can see the green staple was the wild terrestrial vertebrates. And then you can see a thin red line, which was us, humans. And then you go to the right, and then you see that the green section has diminished dramatically. And there was a report just recently showing a World Wildlife Fund report that 74% of all vertebrates have disappeared in the last 50 years. And then all vertebrates, including birds and fish. Anyway, you can see that the numbers for domestic has increased quite dramatically, and of course humans. So this is a transition that has happened. It happened in northern countries, and it has happened all over the world. However, in Sweden, and here I would of course would be nice to have numbers from Finland as well, but in Sweden, because I think it's very similar in Sweden, we have had a quite dramatic comeback of many of the large terrestrial mammals. Basically, we had very few moose in the beginning of the 19th century, but now we have some 200 somewhere between 200 and 250,000 moose. Today this data is mainly estimated from culling. So we are culling about 60 to somewhere around 60,000 moose annually in Sweden today. Red deer, similarly, supposedly we had fewer than 100 specimens of red deer, and similarly for roe deer. And now they count in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. And wild boar was completely eradicated, reintroduced in the 1970s, and now we count about 300,000 of wild boar in Sweden. This is a data from a few years back, so it may have shifted, but still. European beaver was also extinct and reintroduced, and counts in hundreds of thousands now. And also the large carnivores have had a quite decent comeback. We basically had no wolves. 305 is a few years old, but we have it's about the same, between 300 and 400 wolves. We have almost 3,000 bears. We have some 1,500 lynx and some 500-600 wolverines. And as I said, I think the numbers are fairly similar in Finland. And even though 300 or 400 wolves does not sound many, it's at least 300 or 400 times more than zero. So it's quite an interesting recovery. And I think, to me and to many others, it provides some hope, actually. Because I think all these species are very important, and we need to find means to coexist with them. And it seems like we have something going up here. Still problems in many parts of the world, but we have some system that is reasonably functional. Anyway, now we're drifting on to wildlife introductions, and I told you already that beaver was reintroduced to Sweden. It was completely extinct and reintroduced in 1920s, actually 1922 to be more specific. The wild boar was reintroduced in the 1970s, a little bit less specific because it was escapees from enclosures. And then the white stork, I put a bird example. The white stork started a reintroduction program some 15-20 years ago. in the 1990s, and it has been very successful, and we now today have reproducing white stork populations in southern Sweden, and it's spreading. It's going fairly well. So these are examples on reintroductions that have been done in Sweden, and basically what this is rewilding. These are examples of rewilding in a Northern European context. Even the recovery is also a part of the rewilding, and there have been supplementary release and such, but mostly because of protection and reintroductions. And of course, in northern countries as well, we do exploit the wildlife resources. And wildlife is a lot of things. It's experiences, it's part of the biodiversity, they're drivers of biodiversity, but they are also enduring a rich environment, providing experiences, but of course also food. We hunt a lot in Sweden. The Swedish people eat on average 2 kilograms of wildlife meat annually. I don't know what the numbers would be for Finland, but I would think it's similar. So it's quite an important resource in many ways, and this is just a figure to sort of exemplify, try to cover it all. And I think there is sustainability here, if you can find the balance between different interests. And looking in the peak hole into the future, there are opportunities with reintroductions or fauna restorations. And these are a few examples of species that, at least in Sweden, we don't have as wild species. I know in Finland you have, as I told you, you have the wild reindeer. I think you have mellanspett. I don't know what the English name for that is, but it's this middle-sized woodpecker. But then, and maybe you also have black stork. I'm not so certain about that. But I know you don't have European bison, you don't have wild horse, you don't have aurochs, you don't have wild cats, and let's go say great bustard down to the right, and blue jay or the European pond turtle, I think, or also. So these are examples of species that we could pay attention to in the future if we want to make rewild our countries or restore the fauna in our countries. There is a variety of species to work with in the future, and I think there's a lot of promise in this, and it can create a lot of enthusiasm, and I think it's really important. I think it's an obligation. Okay, that was some background on population history. Now we will go into grazing and the large grazers, and eventually into the horse and the bison. But here are some ordinary here for the cows. And since the large grazers went extinct, we and our domestic species has taken over as the engineers of the open pastoral landscape. And you may know that the pastoral landscape we have in the north here is one of the biologically most rich landscape we have in the world, actually, per area unit. So this has been a very important ecosystem function withheld with our domesticated species and of course our own management. Now, in the last 100 years in Sweden, there has been quite a dramatic change. Much of this pastoral landscape has been lost and replaced with forest. And these images from colleagues at Stockholm University show an area south of Stockholm where you can see that almost all of the red semi-natural grassland has been gone in 100 years. And this is true for all over Sweden. I think the numbers are somewhere between 70 and 80%. In this specific area, I think it's even more. I think it's almost 100%, and in many areas there are. So it's basically over the country, it's some variation, but in some areas almost 100% of the semi-natural grassland has been gone. And this is because we have stopped keeping animals in this way, grazing in the landscape. 100 years ago, we had our cattle, we had our horses, we had our sheep, we had our pigs, free on the countryside, roaming in the forests, creating semi-natural grasslands. And gradually since then, we have removed them. put them in smaller enclosures, put them in barns, fed them instead of providing them with free grazing. So this has been a dramatic change. And I think this is very similar. The scenario is quite similar in Finland. And since this is so biological rich landscape, this is very problematic from a biological perspective. So how can we find ways to counteract this development? That's basically the thought behind what we refer to as the Gotlandrus project, which we started. It's actually more than 10 years ago now we started this project. In 2000, I think it must have been 2013, we were sitting having coffee break, me and a colleague, Anna Jansson, discussing this issue, and we realized that maybe we could design a project where we used Gotlandrus as a proxy for wild horse, and then we studied the impact of the Gotlandrus on the landscape on one hand, but then on the other hand, how can Gotlandrus health be preserved if it's kept on annual grazing without supplementary feeding. Now, first, the Gotlandrus is a Swedish national breed. It's from the island of Gotland, which we have in the middle of the Baltic Sea. I was about to say something, but I skipped that. This is recorded. So I need to think of what I say. Anyway, it has been this Gotlandrus is a breed that has supposedly been feral on Gotland as much as 5,000 years. There are horse remains from Gotland that are 5,000 years old, and those were most likely not wild horses, because there were most likely no wild horses that could get to Gotland even then. So supposedly there was some sort of pre-domestic horse that was brought to Gotland by humans. And they were kept as a joint resource in the central forest of Gotland, all up until the 1930s when they were removed. So they have been feral, and our thinking is that since they have been more or less feral, like this, like sort of a horse pool, you could go in and take the horse you need, and then you could release it again. They've been feral, kept feral, so they have kept very important characteristics or features that makes them suitable for being rewilded, if you like. So that's why we picked the Gotlandrus. So we did a 3-year study. We applied for money. We discussed this. We decided, let's go. We applied for money. We got some money first from Wildlife Fund, World Wildlife Fund. And then we started in 2014, we started an experiment. We established 3 enclosures outside of Uppsala. I will just in a minute show you them, how they look like. We minimized the handling and we did not feed them. So they were kept in these enclosures without supplementary feeding. During the time of the project, we assessed the horse welfare and the impact on the landscape, the biological effects. And the objectives, as I told you, we were thinking this as a model to test ecosystem function and also to develop some sort of feral horsekeeping or extensive horsekeeping, if you like. And also, of course, a mean to alter this loss of biodiversity. And also we had some thoughts that this could be a way to benefit regional development, another kind of husbandry, perhaps. Because you can eat horses as well. Okay, so, and this was a big project, and I will not go through all of these colleagues, but you can see we were a lot of people involved. So the experimental area was set outside of Uppsala in an area called Krusenberg, and you can see there were 3 replicates, and the size was around 10 hectares, of which 3 hectares was field and 7 hectares was forest. And then you see on the map where it is, and I would say it's about the, vad blir det nu då? Longitude or latitude, about as north as Helsinki. So southern Finland and Uppland is, I think, it's about the same. latitudes or longitudes. I've mixed them up all the time. Anyway, you can see here blue rectangles in the picture, and those are our experimental design, and they were looked simply like this. You have we in each of the enclosures on the replicate, we added 3 exclosures, which functioned as control areas. And within these exclosures, we could compare how things develop without grazing from horse or without any management to what happens in the area where the horses could graze. So outside the exclosures, within the enclosures. So this was the, well, quite simple experimental design. And in this way, we could assess floral development, we could assess vertebrate fauna, and we could also assess the impact on forest. And yes, I should perhaps mention that you can see that the ditch is in the middle, or the exclosure is centered over the ditch. So we have forest area and pasture area, and use both forest and pasture to assess biological diversity. And yes, and I should perhaps point out again that when I add the reference down, in this case Garrido et al. From 2019, this is published material, so you can read more about it in these articles that are provided here. Yes, so this is the design. So then when it comes to health index, to follow how the horse is managed, I will say some words. I should emphasize that this is not my expertise. This is my colleague Anna Jansson's expertise and others that work with her. But I will show you some slides with some information. Some of it is published, some of it is not published yet, but it's underway. But we had daily observations of our horses during the project time, and weekly we did measures of their health status. So we had daily observations and weekly measures. And during the weekly measures, we followed something called a health index. And again, I apologize. I had this in Swedish. I didn't find it in English. But you see the yellow marked grading. This is a grading that goes between 1 and 9, and 1 is basically almost dead, and 9 is extremely fat and maybe over fat, so not healthy in that sense, but between extremely skinny and extremely fat. And when you took all these measures, you put them into a calculation, a model, and then you came out where they are on a health scale in this way. So somewhere between 1 and 9. And when the horses went down to 4, which is slunk, which is lanky, and then you can actually see the ribs, and you have a little bit less fat than you would like, and so forth, so you can see actually that the horse is not in the best condition. When they reached this health index 4, then we had to take the horses out of the experiment, because then they were considered to be in too poor condition. So what we did then was, if this happened, we took them out of the experiment and we provided them with supplementary feeding outside the experimental area. And the reason for doing that was that if you add supplementary feeding within the experimental area, you affect the nutritional component of the landscape, you will affect the biological diversity, and you may even add seeds because they are processed through the feed they're getting. So therefore we had to take them out. But we were not allowed to starve the horses to death. So we took, whenever they reached this low index, we took them out and care for them, and then put them back when they were back in shape again. So some data from the horse. Well, this is actually not from the horse experiment, but the first one here is actually a figure of grass energy content. And you can see that, so we collected grass in all the enclosures to study the energy content. to see how much energy that was available for the horse forage. And you can see that the grass sway, you see here the 3 different experimental seasons, and you can see that the grass sway was largest in May and July, and then went down during September, October, and into November. And then, of course, in the winter, there was lowest. But you can see that there is quite a lot of energy within the grass. And then we follow this horse body score, and here you can see my colleagues Anna Jansson and Sara Ringmark, and this is a former publication by Sara Ringmark et al. 2019 in the scientific journal Animals. And here you can see how the body score shifted between the years, and you can see the first winter or the first summer season. You can see we started the experiment in May, and then you can see the increase of body score. And then you can see the decrease during autumn, and then they basically on the lowest in February. I don't know if you can move. No, I don't have a pointer. And then the second year, the body score increased quite high. I mean, from 5.5 perhaps to 6, almost 7. And then it goes down again, but the dip comes a little bit later. And you can, and then the third year we only did it until September, so then the experiment had to be stopped. But you see the increasing body score, the horses become very fat during the summer. And you can see the maximum weight here and the minimum weight, the maximum weight 294 on average, and the minimum 227 on average. And this is a 67 kilogram difference, and it's 30% of a healthy body weight of these horses. And 60, and this is one of my colleagues' calculations, 60 kilogram of fat is equivalent to 80 days energy need. So basically what this tells us is that the horses, they became very fat during summer, and the energy they put on basically made them survive through the winter. And this is not strange, because this is what happens to all wild ungulates. And it happened to us, I don't know, not more than 100 or maybe 200 years ago. It happened to us every winter. This time of year, things were getting rough. And also, those of us that are a little bit older, like me, I have a lot of fat, so I will do fine, even though if I don't get any feed. Now I do get fed, so I'm good. But younger people, perhaps in the 20s, 20s, if they lose too much energy in the winter, it's not good for them. Exactly the same for horses and moose and whatever. So this is not strange, but it's interesting to see that our Gotlandros horses have these features that are very similar to what wild animals have. So also then, of course, you are very curious, how many horses did we have to remove from the experiment? The first winter season, so when the horses was, and they were young horses, they were yearlings when we started, I should have said. The horses were yearling stallions when we started in May 2014. And then during winter 2014-15, well, first they put on fat during the summer 2014, but then in early spring, February 2015, there were 3 individuals that came down below this body score index of 4. And then we have to remove them from the experiment, add supplementary feeding and put them back. So 3 out of 12 individuals had to be taken out. So that's basically, well, it's 20% of the population. And it's not that they would have died if we would have kept them, but we were not allowed to push them any further. That's important to know. Second winter, they were very much better prepared. So in second winter, they gain more fat during the summer, so they manage much better in the second winter. And of course, this also depends on the winter weather, but that varies. So it's, you know, some years the road years starve to death, and some years they do fine. This has been a fine year in Sweden for wildlife so far. So this is a variation between years also, but it's also age dependent. So in second year, only one individual has to be taken out and supplementary fed. And then, of course, I need to mention that one individual was damaged, was injured, so we have to remove it from the experiment. They are quite peculiar, these horses. I've become very fond of them, and they have a way of finding everything that is interesting. And if they find something interesting, they meddle around, fiddle around with it. And what they found was actually an old a ditch where the old farmers, I mean, in ancient times, have put a lot of glass, old bottles and stuff, and they crashed that. And this horse, he cut himself open in this area. And so we have to fence that area off, but the damage was already done. So we have to remove this individual. So that's the reason, not because he was starving. It was because he injured himself on glass, trashed glass in the ground. Of course, you have parasites, and in particular, if you keep a horse in a tiny enclosure. We did a study on that, Eva Thudén et al. Also in 2019 in animals. There were nematodes, fur lice, botflies, and they had to be treated. It was necessary for welfare purposes. Of course, they may have survived still, but we did treatment with Pyrantel and moxidectin. If you're a vet, you may know what this is. I don't, but it's against nematodes and lice. And in particular, well, both of these treatments are, of course, negative for biodiversity. These are toxic substances you are put in the horses. So in the shit, any fly that put their eggs in the shit, they will die because there is anti-worm toxic substances in the fecal droppings. And of course, the horses were also bothered by mosquitoes and other flies. So these windshields, so we have to, according to Swedish law, you have to have a windshield for the horses. And these windshields are primarily thought of as shelter during winter, but our horses mostly use them during the hottest summer days when the mosquitoes and the flies was the biggest problem. So that's also data that is unpublished, but it's quite interesting that they use them, as you can see on the picture, but they use them primarily when it was hot and beautiful summer days. It's like they say in southern USA, never sit in the shade. No, never sit in the sun when you can sit in the shade. And it's pretty much what our horses did. So some conclusions on forage and health. Year-round grazing with horses increased pasture quantity and quality compared to monthly moving. Yeah, so we had a comparative design there. The protein content of the pasture was sufficiently high throughout the year to meet the needs of the adult horses. Juvenile horses were more susceptible. We don't know what would have happened if they would be completely wild. I think they would manage very well, and even the young horses would manage well. They were fenced in, remember that. But the younger horses suffered more during the winter period than the older ones. Pasture may be insufficient if the horse has not been able to build up the required fat reserves. Yes, basically, compared to wildlife. So it's important that they get time to build up the fat content. And and I will tell you a little bit more about the biodiversity, but year-round grazing with horses can be a tool to increase biological diversity. And also some recommendations from an animal welfare perspective on feral grazing in case you're interested in starting a project or some experiment or just test it. I don't know what you're allowed to do, but continuous grazing is important, and you should have it on from early summer because this puts energy, it adds energy to the feed. Of course, you should adapt the number of horses to the land yield or the production of the land. According to Swedish law, it's necessary to have regular tests of horse condition and daily care. And then, of course, if you see that they suffer, supplementary fooding or something is necessary. And of course, from a Swedish perspective, and this is from a Swedish perspective, you have to have, there are legal requirements for shelter, water and as I said, daily supervision. They didn't use the shelter. And frankly, they didn't use, we had water, even in the winter, we went there daily and put water in the container that froze. They never went there. You could see the tracks in the snow. They were rarely going to the water to drink the water. They find water in the landscape. Of course, it cannot be very dry, but you see there it's snow, so they eat snow, but they also find water. I don't know how they did it, but they didn't drink the water we provided them with, but it's still a legal requirement. Okej. Ska vi se. Ja, tiden går fort, hörni. Biological research. So here you remember I showed you the exclosures and the enclosures. So to the right in your picture, you should see the grazed area, and to the left in the picture, you can see the ungrazed area, the exclosure. And then you can see in the small picture, you can see a toilet. So the horses shit in piles. So they make toilets, and these toilets they avoid grazing around the toilets. So there you get very lot of nutrients, and you have a very rich flora in the specific spots. Basically, I could show you this picture, and you get the hang of it. You can within here you can see what I will tell you in the next few slides. It's very illustrative. They say like a picture says more than 1,000 words. You can see the impact on the horse grazing here. You can see that basically they take out all the deciduous trees, and they keep the grass very, very short in this way, apart from the toilets. And they get, on the other hand, very rich in flowers and so forth. But you have on the left, you have the traditional forest regeneration challenge that has happened, of course, with planting, forest planting in many ways, many areas in Sweden and in Finland. Details, plant community. The ones that marked red, we had a significant change during the course of the project. Plants with specific leaf area increased with grazing. Plant height decreased with grazing, naturally. Specific leaf area, so that's plants that have leaves that spread out close to the ground. It's also very logical. Ruderal plants that are more opportunistic, increased with grazing, and this is not also reasonable because the horses provide disturbance. A very important biological effect, disturbance. Species richness was the loss. It was not, you could not see a change, but you can see that there was a significant loss, a halter of the loss with time. So biodiversity was going down, the process that you can see in this kind of land areas, but due to the horse grazing, it was lost a little bit less. Rapidly. So the horses in this way supported species richness. Bee pollinated plant increased with time, generalist pollinated plant decreased with time. This is also indication of a grazing effect, that you have more bee pollinated plants and you have the generalists suffer from grazing in general. And then the other ones, there was no change. And here's a picture that shows you how the change could look like. So here you can actually see this is the species richness. You can see in the treatment, in the grazed, in the left section, you see the grazed area. You can see that the species richness go down, but not as rapidly as in the ungrazed areas. So this is what I mean with loss haltered with time. Pollinator activity. The butterfly species numbers that we collected was higher. There were higher butterfly species number in grazed plots. Butterflies was also resting more often in grazed plots. Bumblebee species numbers was also higher in grazed plots, and bumblebee feeding activity was higher in grazed plots. For butterfly feeding activity and for bumblebee resting activity, we didn't have any. Well, actually, we didn't have any observations of bumblebees resting, which is, of course, they're bumblebees, right? And butterflies feeding activity, we couldn't see any effect. Also, we studied orthopterans. And in short, showing from this data, these toilets, the horse toilets were, so we tested grazed area, ungrazed area, and toilets. And the toilets, the numbers of orthopterans was significantly, the number of orthopterans were significantly larger in the toilet areas. So this is also, of course, because of the horses. And then you can see the grazing impact on shrub. You could see it on the picture, but these are the data. You can see on the left-hand side the grazed area, and on the right-hand side the ungrazed area. You can see that on the ungrazed area, you can almost see that the longer out in the field you go, the faster the bushes are regenerating. And then you can see a decline from the edge zone and out to the grazed area in the grazed. Out to in the pasture, you can see a loss of height if the further out you go in the pasture. And there was a significant difference, of course, between the height of the deciduous trees. This is also published. So biologically, in short, this project show that Gotlandrus will, kept in this way, support floral diversity, they prevent shrubification, they benefit butterflies and bumblebees, and they benefit orthopterans. And all of this work is actually published by Pablo Garrido, who was doing part of his PhD in this project and has been working with it a little bit since. He is now working at the regional board in Spain, a regional board in the Leon province in Spain. Also, I think you may find interesting, I at least find it very interesting, to compare herbivore mass. And in our project, we had about 100 kilogram of herbivore, that's our horses, per hectare. As a comparison, in Serengeti, the national park in Tanzania, where you have all these wildebeest populations and zebras and elephants and whatever it is, all these animals, the herbivore mass density is about 19 kilograms per hectare. So it's very close. In this experiment, it's very close to what you have in terms of number of herbivores in Serengeti. Kruger is a national park. It's now open border, I think, but it was fenced, and there you have about 40 kilograms of herbivore per hectare. Oostvaardeplassen is an extreme example of rewilding area, an enclosure in Netherlands where they have horses, cattle, and red deer. And when they started it, they didn't do any culling. So the animals, the population increased until there was no food, and then they starved to death, and then they died by starvation. It was very, very controversial and critical. Since I don't know, quite some time, they are now culling and taking out animals that are suffering. So they are doing a better job in that sense. But they have extreme density. So they have almost 3 times as high density of herbivores on this area. And I will also add, as an interesting, these numbers are, there are certain, I mean, there are plus minus. I mean, they're not so specific. They're approximate. Well, not ours, but most of the others, of course. Koberg estate is one of the more, is an estate in western Sweden, south of our Uppsala, where I'm at, Uppsala latitude. But to the west, it's one of the more rich estates in terms of wildlife, and they have approximately 25 kilograms of herbivores per hectare in this area. And this is information from my colleague at Grimsö Wildlife Research Station, Petter Kjellander. So, in short, horses would do good, so set them free in Sweden and Finland. And this sounds controversial to some, but it's happening all over the world, all over Europe as well, but not yet in the northern countries. So we'll see who gets first. Okay, before I let you go, I realized that time passed, and well, I think I have a few minutes left. I will talk a little bit about bison, because we did a reintroduction suitability analysis of European bison. I was going to say last year, not last year, but we finished it in 2023. So I will tell you a little bit about that. So it's basically an assessment done about the suitability of reintroducing bison, and also in this case it's an accomplishment of a research group, and you can see here that it's Georgia Ausilio, she's a wildlife researcher. Louisa Helmius is a legal law person, a legal counselor. Mats Niklasson is a forest researcher. Axel Sanne is a veterinary. Petter Kjellander is a professor in ecology, and then it's me. So it's us that wrote up this report. So some information. First, one part of it was of course to study if there are any suitable habitats. So we did a habitat suitability analysis, and this was Georgia's accomplishment. And in this habitat suitability analysis, it was not only if there is forage available, but also if there is forage available in a suitable distance from people and infrastructure. So this is different aspects put in layers, and then selecting areas that would be more suitable for bison. And you can see on the left hand, we covered only southern and central Sweden for this habitat suitability analysis, because the further north the snow depth is generally considered being a limit for European bison. But what you can see is that there are definitely some areas in both in the south and in the central part that would be suitable for European bison. Not so much people. Plenty of forage, not so much infrastructure, and larger composed areas. So and you can see also that it might be a little bit more good habitats to the north, and this is a bit of a problem, of course, because probably with our method, the further north you go, the less people there are, but there will be still large areas that would be suitable. But then the snow comes in as a factor that limits the suitability for bison. In a small picture is actually, because this was Skogssällskapet who financed this study, wanted to know if their estate, which is the little black polygon, was suitable for bison. And you can see that half of this little polygon was quite optimal for bison. The other half, not so much. Also, of course, and we realized this gradually during the project, coexisting with European bison is a lot about society. Somebody said that wildlife management is actually management of people, and attitudes from people, and the future of living together with European bison is very, controversial, very uncomprehendable by many people, and this is understandable. There is something new, and there are big animals, but I show you this picture is from Poland, and it shows that it's fully functional. People in Poland live side by side with European bison, and it works. Watch out for the bison, Kraina Subra. And also from a societal perspective, European bison is used for many purposes as a signal of strength, and this is the Avesta Järnverk, so Avesta Iron Works, that selected the European bison as their symbol, and this statue is actually in the center of Avesta, and they're very proud of this bison, and also they have actually an enclosure with bison in Avesta. So it's people get used to them, but also feel a very strong pride of them. And I don't know if anyone has been to Poland, but there you have both starksprit, also liquor, spirits and beer with bison. That is called bison Chuber beer, and you have this bison vodka. So, and a lot of other things, of course. So, but to sum it up, the recommendations from this report is that the local and regional acceptance for bison is very important, and you need to continuously monitor these attitudes among people, because this is crucial. If people on the countryside does not accept bison, it's very hard to see that you have a success if you would reintroduce them. If we reintroduce bison, of course, we have to monitor biological, social, and economic impact. Veterinary monitoring is important through controlled culling. The Swedish EPA, and I suppose in Finland would be the Finnish equivalent, is responsible, and it has to be done. The reintroduction has to be done in dialogue with Swedish EPA. We have bison in Sweden that we could use for this purpose. We just need to dehabituate them. Soft release with no fence technique would be a way to do this practically. So basically, you have no fence. You have collars that is governed by GPS, and they could roam until they reach a virtual barrier, and then you could change this barrier. And could be a way to rapidly reintroduce these animals. We believe that financial compensation for damages would be good, at least initially. We also believe that deflective feeding could be good initially. And we finally recommend a study tour to Villihevosia in Poland to see what it's all about to live side by side with bison. Research that we see needs for are, of course, biological consequences, following the attitudes, and this we'll also actually do. We have got funding to follow attitudes right now, so we're doing that. And also, of course, veterinary medicine to know more about what happens, and of course, try different ways how the animals react to different ways of reintroductions. Take-home message from this work would be local acceptance is crucial. There are some EU directives that may be a little bit limiting in this sense, but there are also some directives or recommendations that are positive, so they are pointing in different directions. We believe that there will be many positive values if we would do this in Sweden, and the ones that do it will definitely write history. Wildlife management history, yes, but also plain history. And if you want to go and by yourself experience a bison and associate with bison without a turmoil and actually knowing where they are, you can go to Bornholm. They have a nice enclosure. You can just go in and out as you like. You can drive the car in, and you know that there will be about 10-15 bison within there somewhere. It's a 200-hectare enclosure. They can be amazingly hard to find, but it's a recommendation to go there. And it's, of course, possible and maybe easier to go there than to go to Poland, and where you need to have guiding to find them in the forest. This is my last slide, and it's not a slide, it's a film. It's to give you a little bit impression what it could be to have free roaming. It could be like to have free roaming bison. And it is from Villihevosia in Poland, and you can see to the left is the head of the research institute, Villihevosia Research Institute, and you can see to the right is a bison, European bison, bull. And soon you will see something that is different from the wildlife that we in Finland and Sweden know of. This bison does not run away. He shows his whole strength to Rafał that stands here. And you can see that Rafał respectfully back off a bit. He doesn't attack, but he doesn't run away. He just shows his strength. And of course, a European bison bull does not back off. A European bison bull stands his ground. And they can also attack if you come too close. But they're very rare. There are very few or no dramatic incidents between European bison. So basically, nothing happens unless you are stupid, of course, and run into them. But it's very different from what you would experience from a moose or a deer. They would run away. Very rarely behave like this, or ever. Okay, folks, kiitos, thank you very much. I am done, and I'm open for questions if you have the strength for it.
Thank you very much. I will stop the recording now, so people can feel more free to ask questions.